In the tradition of Malcolm X, peace be unto you. I'm concerned about tragic days of loneliness and poverty, which lay ahead for African American females. I believe those days will be tragic because most of them will have been set up for elimination by their government. That should come as no surprise to any of us because we have always needed to live with more suspicion about the behavior of government than others. Because we have historical evidence to support a belief that eventually and intentionally the government that we live in will wrong us all. But the suffering of black women is compounded by betrayal too. The grandsons of the males with whom their grandmothers shared the hull of slave ships. The grandsons of the men their grandmothers stood next to while sharecropping throughout the South. The grandsons of the men for whom their grandmothers wept when their manhood was stripped from them. The grandsons of the men their mothers wept for while they were being lynched. The grandsons of those men with whom their grandmothers stood beside in righteous struggle have turned their backs on black women today. The betrayal of those black men is both emotional and physical, but even worse, it is the chorus of disrespect from those men, which penetrate deep into the psyche of black women and kills their soul. It's not as though some of their experiences in the United States have been happy. Happiness has always eluded African American females in the United States. If happiness is the fulfillment of desire, then there can be no happiness for black women in the United States, because the desires of African American women in the United States were not ever intended to be fulfilled. Their womanhood was intended to be wasted. It does not help that many black women show their nearsightedness by lending so much of their effort to toe a line for fly-by-night white feminist movements or organizations. From those which have an LBGT agenda to those which use black women for neoliberal or right-wing conservative agendas, and even for those groups which exploit their adoration for God, black women have been the 40-mule team pulling the political cart for others, without a cart of their own to pull. The ironies are that one, none of their support for white feminist groups will convert to dollars and cents for them when they need it. Historically, that has never been the case. And two, fewer and fewer African American women are able or even willing to expend the energy to cooperate with a man, an African American man, to toe a family line. Far too many of them have started to perceive the African American male through the very same white supremacist stereotypes that plague the minds of African American males in their perception of them. Nevertheless, for the sake of those women, the fact book must be opened. We cannot turn our faces away from the pages which describe future political and social betrayals and the resultant fallout, which will be their shattered lives. My talk is taken from a page in the fact book. My talk will describe an unhappy time, and if you cannot handle it, maybe you should turn this talk off now. It is what the facts on the page compel me to see. At this late date, the range of alternative paths leading black women away to a better situation in the future has become as narrow as a pinhead. That makes me think trouble for most black women is inevitable. Let me lay out some facts. A large percentage of up to 60% of African American women will be on the verge of a catastrophic economic collapse by the year 2050. They will face homelessness in their old age, poor health, a steep decline in their individual lifespans, and a consequent decline in the average lifespan of all African American women. There are many reasons for the formation of what is becoming a greater social challenge than that of the African American male incarceration rate in the 20th and 21st centuries. It is a problem we can clearly see as one would see a storm forming on the distant horizon. Like a growing storm, we can see the growing dysfunction of the New Deal Social Security safety net implemented by the Roosevelt administration in 1936. The Social Security Administration has announced that by 2034, it will no longer have money to meet the needs of people retiring at the age of 65 and older. 53% of the retirement age population, let me repeat that, 53% of the retirement age population depends solely on the guarantee of receiving a Social Security check every month to live on after they can no longer work. There will be no money. There will be no money for 5,942,385 Generation X and millennial black women 64 to 84 by the year 2034. They will need Social Security benefits to survive in their old age, but there will be none. There will be no money. It is projected that the Social Security Administration will go unfunded to the end of the 21st century. But this coming social catastrophe will not have arisen out of a vacuum. There are intersecting lines of no marriage and no children. As of 2010, 61% of African American women were not married. That is the lowest ethnic marriage rate in the nation. That means that as you go around and you see African American women in the marketplace, in school, at work, the greater likelihood is that they are not married. And the greater likelihood is that they will never marry. The downward trend in marriages between black males and females will continue. And most non-black men will not marry black women for many reasons. In 2050, the majority of African American women will be unmarried. Most will have never married. Most of them will never marry. The same will hold true for descendants of slaves who are males. Generally, that will translate into further economic and emotional stability for African Americans in the United States. It means many who live long enough to reach 65 to 70 years of age will be too weak and too old to work. They will be alone because they will not have the emotional, material, and moral support of a husband. A recent study released by the Federal Reserve Bank highlights that only 18% of black families have two-earner households. That fact makes clear that most blacks cannot save money. Black women will not only be alone, but they will be without money. Many black women will be on the street. They will be reduced to begging, and no one will care. As of 2012, the total fertility rate for African American females was 1.3 children for every African American female born age 15 to 45. That is the lowest ethnic fertility rate in the nation. A very large number of black women will have no children or will have had only one child. Probably that one child will be financially unable to render support for their mother. What it means is that there will be no extended family support network for most black women. For over 150 years, African American women benefited from having strong extended family networks, which included husbands, sisters, brothers, children, and grandchildren. Those networks provided an emotional and economic safety net for them in their old age. But traditional family networks will no longer exist in 2050. We are at the end of both the nuclear and extended family network system. We are at the end of a time when the family will be known as a utilitarian value among black people. Whether it should be thought of that way or not is a moral issue. I believe family does have value, but all current evidence compels me to accept the fact that many black people no longer believe that family united by husband and wife has value worth preserving. Intersecting with the breakdown of family structure is the rise of poverty and poor physical and mental health among black women. The population of African American women will also suffer from staggering health problems. Recently, the Center for Disease Control released a report which says in part that the overall health of African American women is deteriorating rapidly. And I quote, "Researchers say the issue has no single cause, but persistent poverty, inadequate health care, and higher risk factors such as high blood pressure, obesity, and diabetes impact black women at a higher rate." End quote. Another study revealed that the median wealth for single black women is $5 compared to $42,600 for white women between the ages of 36 and 49. What that means is that 50% of African American women have $5 or less in cash. What that means is that you would be more likely correct in guessing that the black woman you see about town has $5 or less cash. That fact says that 72% of both Generation X and Millennial African American females have no savings for retirement. Many of them will be burdened by college debt and cost of living expenses during their productive years. For those reasons, they will not be able to save money when they are young. Nor will most black females inherit wealth from their baby boom parents, because by 2024, the median value of assets or wealth held by African Americans is generally projected to be about $1,200 compared to assets or wealth held by whites at over $122,000. Saving money for the future will be problematic for other reasons as well. Monetary inflation has increased on average about 3% per year for over 100 years in the United States. We can rely upon that statistic to have an idea, to form foresight as to how much purchasing value our dollars will have from year to year. That means a dollar in your hand today will be devalued by 3 cents within a year, and every year thereafter, such that within 16 years, that same dollar, if you held it in your hand for 16 years, will have lost 50% of its current purchasing value. It means that the dollar today will buy less for you in 20 years. It means that the only way for you to keep up with the cost of living is to get at least a 3% cost of living raise in your income every year. And you and I know that your employer is not going to give you a 3% cost of living raise every year so that you can keep up with inflation. In fact, they won't give you that 3% cost of living raise because they have to give a raise to themselves so that they can keep up with inflation and maintain their status. It means food and rental costs will be too much for African American females to afford. It means that most black women will be forced to eat junk food. They will live in food deserts, and many of them will live on the streets of America in their old age. Maybe they will live in abandoned cars. Maybe some of those cars will be renovated to provide shelter. That will be a sad sight to see mothers and grandmothers living in abandoned cars on the streets of the United States. But by 2060, the masses will have no compassionate sentiment for black women because the masses will have adapted and will perceive black women as having no value to society. They will show no concern for them. The number of elderly is rising in America. Question: who will support them? As of 2018, there are approximately 50 million people over the age of 65. That number is expected to increase to 74 million by 2034 and 81 million by 2050. The question is, who will support them financially? Debates are taking place right now in Washington as I speak. Those debates will steer millions of black women down one track or another. Congress is debating the issue of the DREAM Act, or DACA, as I speak. The Trump administration wants to end the chain policy, which allows immigrants to bring family members into the nation. The Democratic Congress wants to keep that policy and allow millions of illegal immigrants to stay in the nation. Trump wants to build a border wall to keep illegal immigrants out of the nation. But the Democrats know that without a continued influx of both legal and illegal immigrants, there will be not enough people to support the growing number of dependent elderly people in the United States. And that holds true particularly for the state of California. Without enough people in the active or working population to pay the necessary amount of taxes into Social Security, the federal government will face bankruptcy. Just printing more money won't solve the problem either, because the amount of money issued to the agent will have very little purchasing power because of inflation. If the Republicans win, they will allow Social Security to collapse under the colossal weight of millions of dependent people. Given that scenario, most black women will lose everything. Many will die prematurely because they will not have access to health care. White supremacists will say, good. If the progressives win, they will increase state and federal taxation on the rich and unskilled working population of immigrants. Unskilled workers will be trapped doing low-wage service and non-industrial kinds of work. They will be unable to keep up with the cost of living. They will be the new slaves on the American plantation, and there will be no way out for them. Also, the Democratic think tanks are not factoring in the number of immigrant dependent children and elderly, and the burden that they will have on local, county, and state welfare systems, nor the increasing costs due to global climate change damages that will occur regularly throughout the 20th century. And all governments will give priority to damages caused by global warming over the social needs of African American women. Then it all falls apart. States and the federal government will fight over taxation priority. The federal government will dominate the field. Consequently, many states will fall to the level of third world poverty for its lower class citizens. In response to that, taxation burdens will grow from what it takes now to pay your taxes out of your annual income, which is about 3 months to 4 months of your annual income. Consequently, if Democrats prevail, Congress and state legislatures will be forced to cut social welfare programs for the poor by at least 20%. Black women will be the big losers because the costs to state and federal governments to cover the cost of climate change damages, as I said, will take priority over their social needs. We should address this question: individualism or collectivism? Family is a collective endeavor. It's obvious. It's a given. It is composed of members who depend upon one another for economic support, for emotional support, for compassion. But family is a business too. And if you want to start a business, then start a family. Because by managing a family, you learn how to manage any other kind of business. Because in every business, you have to work with business partners. And so in family, you learn how to work with your spouse. Family requires the highest degree of unity between male and female to achieve material and spiritual success. It's not just material success, but it's also spiritual commonality between the husband and wife, which keeps them focused and with a clear vision of the meaning of their relationship and where that is taking them. Historically, family members have supported one another in a variety of ways. On the other hand, individualism is the polar opposite of collectivism. Individualism is the belief in self-interested promotion above all others, at the expense of all others. Family unity cannot be preserved nor success achieved between men and women if, at the same time, they are committed to individualism as a way of life. At some point in the past, both male and female descendants of slaves bought the notion and practice of individualism. And now we are seeing the consequences. Another white supremacist ideology has defined the mental and intellectual landscape and our life situation. The subscription to individualism has been a disaster for both African American men and African American women. It has resulted in the destruction of family as we knew it, because family is no longer a meaningful, practical way of life in the African American communities that you may be able to find. Consequently, we have been atomized, involved solely in our own spheres of interest, while the turf we share evaporates beneath our feet, causing us all to free fall with no direction in sight. Are there some viable choices which can be made now to avoid this inevitable disaster if we fail to make these choices and to act upon them? Unless we become more collectivist in our social relations, the fact book describes an economic freefall as being the most likely fate for millions of African American females. And if it is true that the female, the woman, is the backbone of the community, then the demise of the African American woman in America spells the end of this long and tortuous journey that African people enslaved have taken in the United States. And that is a sad prospect to consider. I am Dr. Stephen Nur Ahmed. Peace be unto you.